How's everybody doing today? Let's get rolling. Hello, everyone, and I am your host, Dr. Joe Berquist. Welcome to the Banker Next Door podcast. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about check fraud. So, there was a very interesting article that came up here. So, this basically says U.S. banks increasingly battle check fraud schemes, and it's so. There's a number of different frauds that banks deal with, I think a lot of people have a tendency to just automatically go to cyber fraud, cybersecurity, identity theft, things like that. While I mean all that is certainly still very much an issue, I think that I probably need to do an episode just going over kind of all of the frauds that banks generally face, because there's a number of different frauds and different schemes and different things that are out there right now. There's a multitude of risks and liabilities that banks have to deal with on a daily, monthly, yearly basis. Um, but surprisingly, check fraud continues to be probably the largest fraud that banks deal with on an annual basis. Another major fraud that banks deal with is wire fraud. Wire fraud's a huge, huge issue in the banking industry. But today, I just wanted to focus on this one article here in particular, talking about check fraud. So. Uh, Suspicious activity reports are often referred to the acronym of SAR. So again, SAR, SAR refers to a suspicious activity report. So that's basically what happens is when banks have a suspicious activity that comes in, they're going to file what's called a SAR report. That's going to go on to one of the regulators called FinCEN, and then FinCEN is going to kind of tabulate and then keep track of a lot of those SAR reports that get reported year in and year out, and try to mine that data to try to find different patterns and things that are going on there. And that's kind of what happened here in this article. So basically, the SARS report for checking fraud at depository institutions more than tripled between 2018 and 2022, up 201% between those years, according to FinCEN. With 447,000 SAR check fraud reports in 2023 through October of this year. And it is on track to beat what they described as the surge in 2022. So check fraud SARs have increased more for personal or business checks than for any other financial instrument. Check fraud is also becoming more prevalent compared to other types of fraud, making up more than 1/3 of all fraud at depository institutions so far this year, excluding what's known as mortgage fraud. So one bank in particular, Regions Financial Corp, they recently announced that they had a loss of $135 million to check fraud just this year alone through September 30th. They had losses of $82 million in the second quarter and $53 million in the third quarter. And they basically said that these were abnormal compared to what they described as normalized check fraud levels. But basically they said that the problem's not going away. But they do expect it to kind of normalize around like 25 million per quarter in the coming quarters, even though that's much higher than their historical run rate. But then it goes on to basically say that, one of the executives from Regions during the conference call basically say, yes, I reached out to some of my peers at other banks, and they basically said the same thing, that, hey, we're also seeing this high amount of check fraud and different things that are going on here. And then I just wanted to show, there was a great chart here in this article, basically said, SAR stats for check fraud at depository institutions. And you can see here that the amount of, so you have SAR reports, and then you have as a percentage of total fraud for the financial institution. So you could see the number of SAR reports filed 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, kind of about in the same range. But then you see this absolute explosion here in 2022, just literally, basically doubling the amount of check fraud. And then in 2023 is not quite as high. The year's not over yet, but it may not quite get just as high as 22, but still incredibly high. And you're approaching, again, about 30% of all bank fraud, or at least 30% of all the SAR reports reported for different types of bank fraud, again, accounting to check fraud. So, and one of the things that they suggest, one of the areas that they suggest is something that as a way to combat this check fraud is by basically adopting AI, basically adopting, different types of generative AI that basically come in and would help to cut down on the amount of time that it takes a person. In other words, if they had an employee working on some of these check fraud matters, it might, they would be eating up hours and hours and hours, and they might be able to use generative AI to dramatically cut down on that. So, but what I wanted to focus in on here was at the very end of the article, this last paragraph here, which basically says the evolution of check fraud. So, and I just want to read a couple things here to you real quick. So, the criminal networks became flush with money after a wave of pandemic era fraud and are taking advantage of the fact that checks are fundamentally insecure and very easy to alter or counterfeit. Fraudsters steal arrow keys from postal workers. They steal checks from the United States Postal Service collection boxes, or they pay post office insiders to siphon checks out. This is some of the ways the frauds are committed. In an example, federal prosecutors seized $400,000 in September from a Washington, D.C. postal worker who allegedly stole $1.7 million in checks. In addition, fraud operations are becoming increasingly sophisticated. Fraudsters can replicate checkbooks or individual checks, forge signatures, and obtain customers' personal information to authenticate transactions. Breaking into a United States postal worker blue collection boxes for checks has evolved into scanning signatures and using software such as Photoshop to create numerous fraudulent checks. And basically, they just kind of make a general comment. They just say, these guys have tentacles all over the place, and they use this information to continue to target their victims. So, so I basically just wanted to kind of wrap this up by basically saying that you need to really work on and I would target this specifically towards small business owners. If you're a small business owner, you really need to start talking to your bank about different products that they may have to help you prevent check fraud. One of the best products out there is a thing called Positive Pay. Positive Pay is something that's sold usually through the cash management unit or division of a particular bank. I would go in there and basically ask your banker, or go to some, maybe the manager at your local retail branch, or if you have a commercial lender or a wealth management person, somebody like that, just say, hey, can you put me in touch with somebody in the cash management department? I really like to talk to them about their cash management products. In particular, maybe you look at things like Lockbox, Positive Pay, other things like that. But Positive Pay in particular can really help you cut down on fraudulent checks. It can't prevent everything. I mean, nothing is perfect, but it can definitely be a big help. And yes, there is a cost to it. There's a cost to everything, but I think the cost of a product like that is minimal compared to the potential cost of a fraudulent situation that may cost you thousands, tens of thousands, or who knows, if you're a big enough company, maybe even millions of dollars. So definitely look into these things. Keep an eye out. Check fraud obviously is a major thing. I always think back to the movie. If you remember the Leonardo DiCaprio movie called Catch Me If You Can. I mean, that movie was basically, that's what he was doing throughout the whole movie. He had this giant printing press. I think was it in Russia, or it was in Europe somewhere, but he had this printing press, and that's what he was using to print all of his checks. And then, Tom Hanks chases him all over the place. Tom Hanks plays the FBI agent, but the gentleman in real life was a gentleman named Frank Abagnale, something like that. But Frank ended up actually working for the FBI. He was so good. He was so good at committing the check fraud and committing all kinds of other frauds and scams that the FBI actually hired him. And now he has become, I would venture to say, probably one of the foremost fraud experts in the United States. And you can look him up on YouTube. He's got dozens of videos out there going over all kinds of fraud schemes and everything else. But again, I just thought that this was very important, because I just wanted to point out that, check fraud is obviously a very prevalent fraud issue with banks across the country. It continues to be one of the major frauds that banks continue to deal with. And if you're an individual out there, just be very careful about the checks that you're writing, how you're mailing them out, where you're mailing them out, things of that nature. And then if you're a business owner, again, just to be very careful. Definitely check with your bank, see what kind of products and services they're offering right now that could potentially help you to, obviously cut down on any potential fraud in the future. So, but if everybody found this useful, please like and subscribe. Make sure to leave a comment down below. And I always love getting back to people's comments. And I hope to talk to everybody again real soon. Thanks a lot.